Now I'm going to introduce the North Africa Middle East region. So we've already talked about the African Transition Zone, or the Sahel, as a nice transition from sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa, in which they're very much different in terms of physical geography, but also cultural geography. And that transition goes right along through here. So you have countries like Sudan, Chad, Niger, Mali, in which you can see how Mali, not Mali, Mali, in which the line goes right through them. And so this is kind of complicated because part of their country, you could say, is part of sub-Saharan Africa. The other part is part of North Africa. And in the case of Sudan, you can see how Sudan, which is very much considered part of North Africa, is you can see how the line goes right through here, this green area to the south and this kind of brown area to the north. It makes sense why this area is separated, because its physical environment is quite different, but also it's culturally quite different as well. And of course, clever name, South Sudan is south of Sudan. Also, like I said, included is the Horn of Africa, East Africa, in particular Somalia. We'll talk about this later in the chapter. A lot of connections between this part of Africa and the Middle East. Go ahead and we zoom out. Go back to the other side of North Africa. We have Morocco. A lot of people think of Morocco being a European country, but it's actually part of Africa. It is quite close, as we can see here. Morocco quite close to Europe, but Morocco is part of Africa. It's on the continent of Africa. We have the Atlas Mountains up here, which is the rugged feature, but for the most part, North Africa is a vast desert. There is some topography, there are some mountains here and there, but it is quite flat, pretty much a big old desert. We go over here, we have Egypt, which often is combined with much of these other countries to be thought of as part of the Middle East. That's fine. As we're going to talk about, the Middle East is kind of a vague term anyway. So Egypt, we can see the Nile River coming right through here, very, very green, and that's where much of the population lives. We're going to come back to that later in this chapter for sure. Egypt, something interesting, as we'll see in another part of this region, is it's on two continents. And so we got this little sliver goes right through here. On one side is Egypt, which is part of Africa, and then we have this part over here, which is part of Asia. So Egypt is on two continents. Interestingly, we think of this area as being quite dry, but the interesting characteristics are it's got these very, very fascinating waterways, one of which being the Red Sea, these various interesting canals. We've got the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Oman, and all these various waterways, the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, yada, yada, yada. So it's interesting in this very, very dry area, the role and the prominence that water plays. We zoom back in, we see these 5 countries: Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Those are actually what we refer to as the Middle East. It actually goes back to the Europeans. They referred to this area as being part of the Middle East. That doesn't really answer the question, though, why is it called the Middle East? We zoom back out. Turkey was referred to as the Near East. And we zoom out even further, we can think of Europe being up here. It was referred to as the Near East. And then we have China and India, which were the Far East. So in between, middle, clever enough, Middle East. We have this particular area, those 5 present-day countries. But another way to think of this is just from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf. We zoom back out, we've got the Arabian Peninsula right through here, in which we have these various countries and some very wealthy countries located here along the Persian Gulf. I'm going to zoom back up and look at Turkey. Turkey, which once again we referred to as the Near East back in the day, way back in the day, we being Europeans, not so much me or us. So another interesting characteristic about Turkey is it's also just like Egypt. We really don't see this in too many other places in the world, in which it's on 2 continents. So right through here is separation between Asia and Europe, and right this area right through here is actually part of Turkey. So Turkey also quite rugged. You see green, much different than the rest of the region. However, it does have one common similarity that does make it very much part of this North Africa, Middle East region. Another country I've not talked about is Iran. I'm getting there, but we can see Iran very, very rugged through here, and it's on the other side of the Persian Gulf from Saudi Arabia. We'll come back to that idea here very soon. Next up here we have the Caucasus Mountains. So I'd probably be best just to go ahead and change my view and change it to actually the terrain view to really showcase this particular area, the Caucasus Mountains. And so we have three countries, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. And so here's the Caucasus Mountains, the Greater Caucasus and the Lesser Caucasus Mountains. But we have these three different countries in which it kind of looks like it makes sense where they're located. So here Armenia flat, but has this inland water body. Azerbaijan, access to the Caspian Sea, but quite flat through here. Georgia, quite flat. And so obviously if we have these rugged areas that kind of protect them on both their sides or on all their various sides. And so physical barriers have done a lot to kind of keep these areas their own countries and not becoming swallowed up by another country. Well, kind of, sort of. I'll come back to that idea. But, one thing I would ponder is, well, why don't they just kind of come together as three countries come together as one since they kind of have this area? Well, we'll look at some cultural characteristics that kind of prevent that. We zoom back out. We look now at Iran. Iran's kind of isolated in many ways in the world. We'll look at some data later in this chapter that shows it's not really well liked throughout the world. It's not just in the United States. It's in other parts of the world in which they really don't like Iran. And so it's been isolated, and you look at its physical geography helps to play a role there. It's kind of isolated in terms of these water bodies, the Caspian Sea on one side, and on the other side, the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. But it also has this mountain chain, and this mountain chain is called the Zagros, Zagros mountains, which actually runs all the way through northern Iraq and into Turkey, and actually way over into here, and just, as far as much of southeastern Turkey. And so this mountain chain that runs through here, the Zagros Mountains, is very important for understanding why Iran and Iraq are separated from each other. And so they have some similarities. They also have some differences. Well, why do they have those differences? Well, they definitely say the role of mountains for sure play a key role. And so, like I said, the Caspian Sea, we zoom out the Caspian Sea, and if we notice the Caspian Sea, we get through, what country is that? That is the country of Russia. And so Iran, via the Caspian Sea, and Russia have essentially a boundary. Now, they might not have a physical boundary on the map, but they do have a connection. Now, we go over here to the other part of the world. We see Russia and Turkey have a connection. We're definitely going to maybe see that connection. These connections play more of a role in the Middle East going forward. Now, some would say this region probably should be called Southwest Asia because it's kind of in the southwest corner of Asia. We got Southwest Asia, Central Asia, Southeast. However, we don't see it ever called on the news Southwest Asia. It's always called the Middle East. And so the Middle East technically doesn't include Iran. But if you ask the common person, is Iran part of the Middle East? They'll for sure tell you, yes, it is.